So they're two different pieces of legislation that govern those two. And so I think one of the main concerns was, what the application process is to be granted those approvals. Maybe if some of the ministry representatives could walk us through exactly, or maybe not exactly, but generally how that goes. There was also some questions that were raised on the monitoring of those granted applications, how any issues with the applications when it's occurring, how those are tracked and how those could be reported, because I believe the ministry does the monitoring for both of them, even though OMAFRA is the one who grants the NASM plan approvals. And then, as Mark mentioned, we do have a couple of suggestions to hopefully address some of the questions that were raised by the board in last year. Those being that the NASM plans and the environmental compliance applications be added to the Access Environment website, so that all interested parties can comment on them. That potentially the process by which municipalities and other commenting agencies are notified of these applications, that could potentially, have some updates to it, and then allowing for adequate timelines of the submission of comments. Again, that it would be very beneficial if they were all online and available for comment, and then that the any potentially affected municipalities receive copies of any incidents or spill reports if those do happen to occur with those applications. And then we also had some questions to be addressed about the Planning Act and whether or not the Planning Act would have a role in these approvals at all, or these commenting processes. And I'm not sure, Ron, if you maybe want to speak to your thoughts as a planner on that. We have some notes in the agenda package just stating that this is kind of outside of that potentially. But Ron, do you maybe want to speak to the planning side of things with this issue?
Really have anything to say that isn't in that report already. I don't think this has anything to do with a Planning Act, the mandate of the Planning Act in any way. It's not really, it deals with land use in terms of development. So the Planning Act would deal with whether or not agriculture is permitted. It wouldn't have anything to do with an actual farming practice. Maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Are you done there, Jenna, with your overview?
Pretty much, yeah. Yep, that's good. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll just ask if any of our guests from the MECP or OMAFRA, do you have anything to add that was maybe missed, or anything to add? And then we'll see if there's any questions. Anybody who's on the call?
Hi there. It's can everybody hear me? It's Dave Bradley here. I'm the district manager in Peterborough.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Okay, thank you. No, I think Jenna covered it quite well. I mean, I'm happy to go through our process. I think Jenna explained there is a difference, and we just wanted to clarify that between NASM applications and hauled sewage. Hauled sewage is a waste under the Environmental Protection Act, not so much an agricultural operation, and it's not really applied to be to be used as a soil amendment. It's really just waste disposal. So we review those under the Environmental Protection Act, which are and the applications, when we get them, are posted on the environmental registry for public comment. And we do a thorough review of those applications, and we engage in a number of these sites. We engage our technical experts in soil and groundwater, and our air unit as well if there's odor issues. So that's about all I can really say. The process has changed. I guess it's evolved over the years. We've many more of these sites are using qualified environmental consultants to do soil analysis and to propose monitoring programs, which we include in these environmental compliance approvals that are issued. So the districts monitor these sites for compliance, and we do regular inspections. If there is monitoring requirements on the properties, we get those reports usually annually, which we'll have our technical experts review and comment on. And if there's any follow-up that we need, then we will do that. You know, we do get a number of comments, particularly in Halliburton, from sites that we have on the environmental registry. So we do have to take those comments into consideration, and we do take them into consideration when we're reviewing the application and try to address those issues. And of course, for technical issues, we engage our technical experts on that as well. So that's the hauled sewage program. Up until April 1st, the approvals were issued by individual district offices, MECP district offices in the province. As of April 1st, the approvals process is being centralized with our environmental approvals and permissions division in Toronto. So the district will still be playing a role in site verification and compliance work, but the actual approvals will be changing to a centralized process. I think that's kind of a general overview. I'm sure you have more questions about the ECA process for hauled sewage. And NASM approvals we do the compliance work in the MECP, but it's OMAFRA that does those approvals. And maybe I can ask, I think Dale is willing to give an update or a general overview of the NASM approval process. So maybe I can just pass it over to Dale if that's all right.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure, it's Matt Wilson here. I'll take a shot, and Dale can correct me on anything I say. So I'm the program lead for OMAFRA and nutrient management. And yeah, I think Jenna gave a good overview of the NASM program. Definitely, it's different than the hauled sewage program. And as David said, the non-egg source material program is about adding nutrients to a crop in beneficial use, where the hauled sewage is waste disposal. So it's different. The other big difference is the nutrient management regulation is a prescriptive regulation. So it lays out that all the rules you need to follow if you're going to apply non-egg source material to land. So it's not a site-specific approval that we issue. When the NASM plan comes in for approval, we are reviewing it to ensure that what's being proposed meets the set of rules that have been passed in the legislation. And I think, as somebody said, MECP, we do the upfront certification of the people that prepare the non-egg source material plan. We do the approval of the non-egg source material plan, and then MECP does the enforcement of the non-egg source material plans and the regulation in general. So basically, how the program works, a consultant is normally the person that is certified under the regulation to prepare a NASM plan. They work with the farmer to get the information needed to show how they're going to apply the NASM, how it's going to be used by the crop. As Jenna said, that the nutrient balancing is all part of it to ensure that the nutrients are being applied for the growing of a crop. Site sketches, setbacks, all those things are part of the NASM plan. It comes in for approval. We go through it to make sure that everything they're proposing to do meets the regulation, and then we would issue the approval. And then sometime after that, usually the NASM plan is issued for a 5-year period. Sometime after that, the NASM application would happen. We notify the municipality that an approval has been issued. We don't get notification, and we don't pass that notification on when the actual application is happening. We just pass on when the approval has happened. I think I'll leave it at that. Dale, did I miss anything key? I'll leave it at that then.
Either Dale's on mute or you got it all. One way or the other. We're good.
I'm sure I got it all.
I'm sure you got it all. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. Are there any other comments from any of our ministry guests that just before we see if there's any questions?
Sorry about that. It's Dale here. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. I was talking a little bit. It's kind of trivial to add, but just one of the parts of the approval process is the evaluation of the soil and the material. There are sampling and analysis requirements for both the soil that's receiving and the material that's to be applied are part of the regulation. I just wanted to add that in, and sorry that I was on mute there for a second.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So I think we'll leave it at that if that's everybody who had anything to add. Is there any questions from any of the directors that would either for staff Jenna or for any of our guests. Kathleen, go ahead.
Hi, I'm wondering what kind of crops do they get spread on?
So for hauled sewage, it's not spread on crops. There's restrictions in place for growing crops after the application of hauled sewage, but our OMAFRA colleagues could probably speak to the biosolids in the crops that it's spread on there.
Does anybody from OMAFRA want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's Dale here. Typically, the crops that the sewage biosol or that non-egg source material is spread on are typically our field crops, like usually corn is the main receiver of the material. Sometimes other field crops like wheat or hay or legume crops may be receiving, but typically it's corn that receives the material.
Okay. We were hoping you were going to say coffee beans, spread on coffee beans. Kathleen has a coffee house, so that would have got her attention. Are there any other questions? Councillor Singh, go ahead.
Yes, thanks very much for looking into this, and I appreciate all the work that has gone into this question, and hopefully I'm not the only one that's learning a great deal from this. And I will be passing this information on to the phone calls and the emails that I received when, particularly at a time when we had a problem with it conflicting our zoning. We had to change zoning to allow this in Minden, which was just upriver from our water intake for our municipality. That's how this started. And then I was also getting some information from Kawartha Lakes as well about their concerns about the spreading on fields and their wells. So I love the recommendations that you've suggested. I really support that and appreciate the thought that's gone behind it. I think the one thing that we still have no really understanding of is how robust these kinds of science is going to be with climate change. And I don't know if there's any way we can tell that at this part, but when we see the, our waters and floods and those sorts of things happening, I mean, and I know the haulers up here, they go over the top in terms of their applying the rules and the regulations, and then they add another percentage to make sure that things are done properly. So the haulers also are doing a great job, but I am concerned about the long term. And I am still concerned that when, for example, if you're not, the zoning applies to the farming, but there are, in this case that we had in Minden, for example, it wasn't land being used for farming. So I think there's considering that all of us in rural areas are having septic tanks and they all need to be pumped, and it's great to have them recycled back into farming, but there is often no planning within the zoning about where those places are going to be other than zoning agriculture. So I think a little bit more public education would help some of the conflicts between people who are buying in rural areas and then find out that they're spreading nearby. And I think there needs just to be more clarity as people get used to rural life about that. So, but I really appreciate the recommendations and the work that's gone into it, and I will pass this information along. I guess my final question is if there's any opportunity where some people are very concerned and believe that their wells have been contaminated by periods of time of the haulage. I mean, it's private property. We don't test for those wells at all. But is there any way for us to take some kind of support in terms of affirming that what we're doing is not affecting individual wells? I don't know.
I guess I would, thank you. No, very good points. And I mean, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation Parks, anybody who's got a concern, they think their well's been impacted by some kind of activity. I mean, we're happy to take those phone calls and assess the information that comes to us and respond and collect samples if we think it's appropriate at the time. A number of these sites we're starting to get monitoring requirements in. So, the one in Minden Hills, there's groundwater monitoring that's on the site so that we can see if there are any impacts before it would even get to somebody well or water course. And we review that data, every year as the reports come in. So we do look at that, but I can certainly understand, and we get a lot of these calls, people's concerns about drinking water in wells, and you know, definitely happy to talk to those residents and address any concerns they have. So you'll feel free to send them my way, or if you have any questions or you get a resident that's concerned, please by all means reach out to my office, especially, you know, particularly in Peterborough District, and we'd be happy to provide some information and kind of assess that information the best we can.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Great comments. And I think the recommendations in this report certainly make the process more transparent, which is always a good thing. So appreciate your comments. Councillor Hooper,
yes, I had a question. Yes,
Yeah.
I did. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair or Deputy Chair. In regards to the groundwater seepage and that, would the same thing be in order for near waterway, like you said, waterways? Would that include lakes as well? Because I know we've had, you know, with the algae blooms and things like that, which is, do they take in consideration the setbacks away from large waterways?
So for hauled sewage, for the waste disposal activities, you know, NASM, I'll let Omafra speak to that, but we do have minimum separation distances from water courses, surface water, which would include seasonal ditches or seasonal waterways, that kind of thing. We have different separation distances based on the slope of the land and then the permeability of the soil. You know, if we're questioning that there could be a potential for, you know, surface water impacts, we have imposed surface water monitoring requirements, and a number of the sites in Haliburton have those requirements on them too. So yes, we do definitely consider surface water impacts while we're reviewing these applications. And like I said, over the last several years, you know, the standard of review of these applications and the quality of information that we're looking for when we're reviewing these is really really increased, I would say, and we have a lot more sites that are being audited with you know, surface water monitoring requirements, groundwater monitoring requirements. Like I said, particularly in Haliburton, where we have seen issues in the past, and we've you know, needed to deal with some of these. And I know some of the municipalities and centralized disposal locations, which are also approved by our ministry as well. So lagoons, disposal trenches, and those would have monitoring requirements as well, you know, like groundwater and surface water. So yes, that is all taken into consideration in our review process.
And one further dumb urbanite question: how long does the application process take?
Well, so it has to be posted on when we get the application, we review it for completeness. Our folks in Southwest Region, so Lisa, who's on the call, they do a review for source water protection requirements. And then if we get that and we're satisfied the application is reasonably complete, it's posted on the Environmental Bill of Rights registry for 45 days for public comment. Once we get that, we do our site review. If we need our technical support staff to review the site, that could take a bit longer until we get their comments. So a new site takes longer than a renewal. So we issue the sites for various timeframes, typically 2 years. So we review them every 2 years before they're renewed. Now this, like I said, this could change. This is how things were done prior to April 1st. You know, now the files are going to be approved or reviewed, sorry, I should say, by our approvals branch in Toronto. So that's how things have been done. So, you know, for a renewal, it could take 2 to 3 months. For a new site, maybe closer to 5 or 6 months. Yeah, it really depends. Then if we have a number of comments on the EBR or comments raised by, you know, the municipality or their stakeholders, it could take even longer because we want to make sure we're addressing those concerns adequately and before approving, you know, that application.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Deb, did you have a question? You had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, I'm just gonna go back in my notes here. Like there's different, the NASM can't be land applied if it has too much metal or E. coli, or the odor detection threshold exceeds OC3. I'm just wondering, because municipalities are only notified once the application is approved or the NASM plan is approved, the monitoring goes on after that. So how, like obviously if an entity has gone through the exercise of putting a satisfactory plan together with OMAFRA, that's great, but it's the afterwards part. Like, how do we know that the proponent is conducting their activities appropriately? Obviously, local people might know if the smell's maybe too strong, but how do we know that?
Who's taking a crack at that one?
I can speak to hauled sewage. So again, there's the distinction between NASM and hauled sewage. So, for hauled sewage, we do regular compliance inspections. We get public complaints and respond to those complaints. If there's issues, we follow up with the operator and owner of the site, to address those issues satisfactorily, to the ministry, which obviously can take some time, but we are out there. We're inspecting these frequently. If we get complaints, we're out there, and we're addressing concerns, of the residents, for their concerns. As for NASM, maybe I can ask somebody from OMAFRA to speak to.
I can start. It's Matt here. Lisa might be able to add some of the compliance stuff, but basically, as was said, the farm, the consultant would tell us how they're going to do the application,
Right.
Following the rules. As Dale said, material that needs to be spread has to be tested, and there's a testing protocol they have to follow. The soil has to be tested again, has to follow a protocol for that, and then it's over. So they tell us they're going to do it the way they're supposed to be doing it, and then it's really over to the compliance piece. So Ministry of the Environment would do the compliance on all the NASM application. They get notification of when application is happening. They do inspections on some sites, maybe not all sites, but some sites, to make sure that the haulers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The other piece, the other piece we didn't talk about is the people doing the application of the NASM have to be certified as well. So it's a different certification for the company that has to do the application, and there's a different license required for the person actually driving the tractor or machine doing the application. So there's a pretty rigorous certification licensing process that goes along with it to make sure everybody understands all the rules, how to read the NASM plan, and ensure that everybody knows the rules and is hopefully following the rules. And then the compliance program is on top of that to make sure people are doing what they are supposed to be doing.
Sorry about it. I should have mentioned that. So yes, our office does the compliance work as well for the NASM plans once they're approved. So we will respond. We'll do proactive inspections every year, but we'll also respond to any complaints, odor complaints, runoff complaints, spreading too close to a well, spreading too close to a water course, exceeding their application rates. Our ministry will follow up on those compliance issues and take appropriate follow-up action to ensure compliance.
Hi, it's Lisa Ross here.
We can hear you, Lisa.
By any chance? It's a miracle. Hi, folks. It's Lisa Ross, Divisional Program Specialist with MECP. Sorry, I was trying to pipe up a couple times and I was apparently unsuccessful. I just wanted to follow up with Dave's comments on the compliance piece. Where the material is a NASM and it's certain types of NASM materials that are known as Category 2 and Category 3 NASMs, and that would certainly include things like sewage biosolids. When that material is going to be applied at an agricultural operation, there's a legal requirement for MECP, our local district office, to be provided with a notice before that land application activity actually takes place. Notice has to be given at least 24 hours beforehand or up to 7 days ahead of time. And in a number of cases, that gives our agricultural environmental officers an opportunity to actually go out to see the land application activity take place. So that's kind of an extra piece, a requirement that's built right into the NASM program to help with the compliance activity. The one other thing I wanted to point out that was to an issue raised long ago was was that currently on the hauled sewage program, we are undergoing the policy and program review. And among other things, we're looking at, all the rules around hauled sewage from a broad policy perspective, but also looking at how we currently regulate the activities in terms of the typical approach we take with our approvals. And as was noted, we have site-specific reviews. We don't have the same kind of permit by rule approach in the Nutrient Management Act. We have site-specific reviews. But even saying that, we do have kind of a standard approach, and we're looking at that kind of general approach we take and considering, do we need to make any changes in light of the most current science, climate change, etc. So all of that work is ongoing as part and parcel of the policy and program review.
Thanks, Lisa. Deb, you get what you needed?
Just one further comment, if I could. On OMAFRA's website, where it has the fact sheets, and one of them is understanding when farms require NMS, NMP, or a NASM plan, that link is not found. So I just wanted to point that out because that might be an important link to restore. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll make sure our communication people are aware of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Sain, you got a follow-up?
Thank you very much. Just to say, I'm really happy to hear what Lisa Ross was saying regarding the ongoing looking at these things and aquifer, but I also like just to point out for future reference, it might not happen in my lifetime, but I think it's an issue, is the pharmaceuticals that are increasing in the groundwater, and before fish can walk, I think we need to try to look at that. I could only find one company who is developing the science out of Ottawa to try to take pharmaceuticals out, but I think there needs to be more work done on that. So, but thanks for everybody for working on this. Appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments. Any final questions for Jenna or any of this ministry staff? Okay, we have a motion, recommended resolution that the report on the approval of spreading of non-agricultural source material and sewage biosolids be received, and that the Source Protection Authority send a letter to the Director of the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks outlining suggested improvements to the ministry's process for approving non-agricultural source material applications. Does anyone want to move that? Councillor Dunn, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Sain. Are there any final questions, comments on the report? Seeing none, is anyone opposed to the motion? Thank you. We will consider the motion passed. And I just want to thank all the ministry staff for taking the time to participate in that call. Thank you. And Jenna as well. Thanks for that report, Jenna. That was nicely spelled out there. So thank you. I will put our chair back to work and put myself on mute. So thank you.
Yeah. And just before, Mr. Chair, before you continue, just wanted to thank all our ministry folks as well for participating. Certainly appreciate your support through this and helping us along in this route. And thanks for your valuable comments. You might have noticed that we are now recording live on YouTube as well. So whether it was John's Magic Fingers, our communication specialist, or whether it was all the positive aura that our ministry folks have been able to supply in order to get the YouTube up and running. It is up and running now, so certainly it could be a combination of both, but thank you again for your comments.
Thank you.
Take care, folks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your participation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
All right, next on the agenda is an update on Trent Conservation Coalition source activities, committee activities. And the recommended resolution is that the update on these activities be received. Could I have someone move that? Director Moore? Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Super. Is there, Jenna, do you want to have any comments on this report?
I can just walk through it quickly because there is quite a bit of material that was covered, as we did have 2 Source Protection Committee meetings since our last Source Protection Authority meeting. Those meetings occurred on January 30th and March 21st. At those meetings, we had multiple new members who joined our committee through the appointment process. We've had a couple of drinking water expert representatives. We've had a recreation and tourism representative, an economic development representative, and then 3 local Source Protection Authority representatives, 2 of which were for our Source Protection Authority. Those new members were Doug Elmsley, who's a City of Kawartha Lakes councillor, and then Brent Devlin, who is from Minden Hills. So both of them will represent our entire watershed on the Source Protection Committee now. We received an update from the chair, who just gave a quick overview that they're at their provincial chairs meeting, there was a discussion on the expansion of source water protection to vulnerable populations, including First Nations. There's some potential there, and that was discussed a couple times. There was a request for endorsement from the Lake Erie Source Protection Region regarding their recommendations for winter maintenance chemicals, specifically around road salt. So there was some correspondence that had gone around about that, and that is being forwarded on to the ministry. There were applications for, or an application recommended that the act be amended to include the vulnerable populations, as previously mentioned, which are currently outside of the municipal drinking water sources. And then it was also noted that potentially education and outreach would be a very valuable tool for expanding at least the knowledge of how to protect your drinking water sources if the expansion for those vulnerable populations is not brought under the umbrella of source water protection under the Clean Water Act. There was an update that the interim reporting for the program had been submitted to the ministry at the end of February. And at that time, they were slightly under budget, and that at the time of the last meeting anyway, our program was progressing well to be on budget for the 2021 fiscal year. So we have a source protection committee meeting hopefully coming up in the next month or two. So I'm not really sure what those numbers will look like now due to the pandemic. Everybody's work has been a little bit altered as a result of that. And it was noted that there had been some cuts to the 2020-2021 budget, including funding for lunches at the Source Protection Committee meetings, which are usually all-day meetings. So we'll be looking to find ways around that. Printing costs and also the licensing for the GIS software that's being used for source water protection, those have all been removed from our budgets for as of this fiscal year. There was a note that the International Plowing Match was to be held in the City of Kawartha Lakes in October of 2020. Due to the pandemic, now that's been pushed back, which we'll be informing our committee members of at the upcoming meeting. And it was noted that when it does occur, it will be a very unique opportunity to share education and outreach on the program with the agricultural sector and just the population in general. So we'll be looking to attend that as well as an education and outreach platform. It was noted that there was feedback from the ministry regarding the proposed technical rule updates that are going forward. Those include the consideration of above ground fuel tanks as significant drinking water threats in intake protection zones. So previously those had been excluded from being significant drinking water threats. And oftentimes outdoor or above grade fuel tanks are a greater threat, especially for surface water areas. So those are being considered as being brought in with the new technical rule changes. They are looking at changing the methodology that was used for calculating impervious surface area, which impacts the road salt as a significant drinking water threat, as there's certain thresholds that have to be met in order for road salt to be considered a significant drinking water threat. And there was also guidance on incorporating non-municipal wells into the drinking water source protection program. And the ministry has expressed that due to the pandemic, they're experiencing quite a few delays in approving some of those Section 34 amendments, one of which it will be one of ours for Canadiana Shores, and I'll provide an update on that a little bit later. And that's also impacting another amendment under the Trent plan for Sterling and Pinewood. They've lumped those two together as directed by the ministry to try and cut down on the number of applications that they're receiving. But there are some quite significant delays in the approvals of those amendment packages. There was an update given that the ministry, in cooperation with Conservation Ontario, have developed a climate change assessment tool. There's two separate tools, one for surface water, one for groundwater. The ministry and Conservation Ontario held training sessions as to how to work those tools. They haven't been released as of yet. We saw some kind of testing versions of them, but they do seem to be very valuable tools that could potentially be used for assessing the impacts of climate change on municipal drinking water systems, as well as other, other aquifers and surface water bodies. And so we're looking into how those can be utilized further for source protection. There was an update on our annual reporting, being that the draft Ganaraska and Trent annual reports were presented. All sections of both reports for our entire source protection region have been graded as progressing well and on target, which led to both of those reports being receiving grades of progressing well and on target. And I just want to note that there's two separate reports for our entire source protection region because we have two separate protection plans. The Trent plan covers our watershed, Otonabee, Crow Valley, and Lower Trent, and then the Ganaraska plan, even though they're in the same region, they have a separate plan just covering off their source protection area. And it was noted that there were some challenges in collecting some of the information that fed into those reports. So staff will be working over this year into the fall to amend our methods for collecting that information to be integrated into the annual reports, hopefully to eliminate some discrepancies there was in the interpretation of some of the questions, and really get down to exactly what information needs to be contained within the reports, and to remove any duplication as well. There were previously identified 14 policies that have been quite difficult to implement, as identified by some of our implementing bodies, specifically municipalities. And so we've kind of been working through those proposed amendments, the first of which was a land acquisition policy. And it was agreed that that policy be amended or stay the same, but that the explanatory document be amended to include rationale for why lands within vulnerable areas should not be disposed of by municipalities if they currently own them. Whereas there was some confusion around that policy in the beginning. That's how the committee chose to address that. For waste disposal sites, they had not been included in the list of potentially prohibited activities. So it was noted and approved that the waste disposal sites be added to the list of potentially prohibited activities, and that a footnote also be added to that policy. For transportation corridors and emergency response policies, it was noted that there was some duplication between the two policies. And for the Trent plan specifically, they have merged the two policies into a new policy, but those policies will stay separate and remain the same in the Ganaraska plan. For sewage systems, there was some discussion around policies S9 and S10 as they directed risk management officials to develop risk management plans for septic systems that were both not covered by the Ontario Building Code and do not require a prescribed instrument. And in speaking with industry professionals, they couldn't think of an instance where this would ever be required, as all septic systems, whether it be a privy or an outhouse, all the way up to large septic systems, fall either under the Ontario Building Code or require a prescribed instrument. So it was approved that those two policies be removed from the source protection plan. The road salt policies were, those amendments were put on hold until we received further guidance from the province as to how they're amending the technical rules. The transport pathway policy was also discussed, and it currently directs municipalities to pass municipal bylaws, which restrict them from approving development applications within an intake protection zone 1 or a wellhead protection area A, where they could potentially create a transport pathway, which would then impact the municipal water system. There was significant discussion around that policy, and that report was received for information, and it will be addressed at a future source protection committee meeting. There was significant discussion also around the transition policy, which states that for agricultural activities engaged in 10 years prior to the date of the approval of the source protection plan, they are to be considered existing and therefore not be subject to prohibition. So the result of that was that the policy will be amended to read that an agricultural activity that the risk management official has been able to verify as being part of a regular farm rotation and has occurred at least once within the previous 10 years. Because right now we're 5 years past the the approval date of the source protection plan. So if we left the policy as it is, any activity happening in the last 15 years would be considered existing. So this is how they've addressed that issue. Therefore, it's 10 years from the date that the risk management official can find it and prove that it's happened in the last 10 years from the date of discovery. Liquid hydrocarbon pipelines have been added as a 22nd significant drinking water threat under the Clean Water Act, and therefore we need to write policies to address them. Fortunately, the Kawarthas plan already has policies written to address the hydrocarbon pipelines, as they have the pipeline that runs along the 401 corridor. So for the most part, we've used them as a basis and as a template for developing policies to go into the Trent plan. So the direction was that staff would draft policy wording, share it with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks for approval, and then refer back to the Source Protection Committee. So between January and March, the draft policy wording had been submitted to the ministry, but they're still awaiting approval. And then once that approval is granted, or once they've received some feedback, the staff will also discuss with pipeline companies to ensure that the policies will adequately address their concerns. And then that will return to the Source Protection Committee for approval. There was an aquaculture policy, which was discussed as well, which was received for information, and it was a suggestion that a new policy be written that directs the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to not issue any licenses for future aquaculture activities where they're within an issues contributing area, so they don't want to put any more stress on those systems. Specifically, it applies to the Sterling drinking water system. And then there was also a note that during our previous Section 34 amendment, which was to bring in water quantity threats, that was approved in 2018. The maps actually had been excluded from inclusion in the final source protection plan and assessment report, despite them being approved by the ministry, because they were included in our amendment package. So the resolution was just that there was a Section 51 amendment to be completed, just to include those maps which were accidentally excluded from those final documents. There was also an update on the Canadian Shores drinking water system amendment package, which is going forward, hopefully shortly, to be submitted to the ministry. The City of Kawartha Lakes, as it is a city system, on February 3rd had passed an endorsement that the amendment package be supported by the municipality and that it be opened up to public consultation. The public consultation period for the amendment began on March 12th. And it ran until April 17th, but upon review of the amendment package, it was noted that not all stakeholders were informed in the public consultation period, and that was due to the timing of the release of the notice and the beginning of the pandemic, where all of our work schedules had kind of been shaken up. So to remedy this, at the direction of the ministry, a second consultation period has been started with those specific stakeholders being targeted. And they have until June 5th to provide any comments or questions they have about the amendment package, but to date we haven't received any comments or questions about it. It is quite straightforward. All that they have done is decommissioned one production well, placed a replacement well 8 meters to the west, not impacting any of the vulnerable areas other than the wellhead protection area A, obviously, which it will shift 8 meters to the west. But other than that, all of the vulnerability scores have stayed the same. All of the impacted properties have stayed the same. And it's a very minor change, but we do have to go through the formal amendment process to finalize that. And that's pretty much everything that's happened at the 2 Source Protection Committee meetings.
All right, thanks, Jana. You touched on a lot of a lot of topics. Is there any questions for Jenna? Director Kieserbrink?
Thank you so much. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, aquaculture, that concerns for the Sterling drinking water system.
Yeah, so I'm not, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not specifically familiar with Sterling, particularly because it's not in our watershed. But I do know that there's been noted upward trending contamination in that system that has potentially been attributed to aquaculture. So they just wanted to be sure that there were protections in place that weren't going to increase those upwardly trending contaminants any further. Maybe Mark, do you know much more about Sterling and the issues contributing area around it?
This, through you, Mr. Chair, this goes, well, a fair ways back now in terms of my history, but I know that Sterling was always is a surface water system and was one that was, they were concerned about in terms of nutrient levels in the stream. So, so aquaculture and the effluent coming out from an aquaculture type activity would likely increase on the nutrient side of things. So that's why the policies are in place.
Further through you, Mr. Chair, I noticed with the NASM as well that they didn't want meat or fish byproducts in the material, the non-agricultural material that was used in the NASM plan. So I wonder if fish have a particular impact on the water that's reflected in this aquaculture policy as well for these industries.
Yeah, they must. Certainly something they're monitoring. Is there any further questions then or for Jenna on this report? Hearing none, we'll do the vote. Is there anyone opposed to receiving it? Hearing none, motion is carried. And the next item on the agenda is the Trent Source Protection Plan Progress Report, and recommend a resolution is that resolved that the approval of grade of P progressing well / on target for the status of implementation within the watershed, and that the draft Kawarthas Halliburton Source Protection Authority Annual Progress Report endorsement and circulation to the Source Protection Committee for comment in according with Ontario Regulation 287/07 be ratified. Resolved that the Trent Source Protection Plan Annual Progress Report endorsement and that the Trent Source Protection Plan Annual Progress Report submission to the Lower Trent Source Protection Authority for delivery to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks as required by Section 46 of the Clean Water Act and Section 52 of Ontario Regulation 287/07 be ratified. Can I have someone make that motion, please? Director Sane, seconded by Director Ross. Jenna, do you have any comments on that or anything you feel we should bring to our attention?
I can just briefly go over, I know everybody has seen this material, I think a couple times, once at our watershed level, and then again over April when we did the basis for what this ratification report is. It was circulated, I guess, and for approval for submission to the ministry. So our watershed, we're doing very well. We're progressing on target, obviously, in all of the areas that receive a grade. There are a few. One of them is Municipal Progress. So that involves all of our municipalities either having completed their official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments to incorporate source water protection. So all of our municipalities either have those started or have completed them already. So we're doing very well there. The septic inspection program, also all of our municipalities have just about completed their first round of inspections, which they had 5 years to do from the implementation date of the source protection plan. There are a few outstanding landowners who have refused to have their septics inspected, so the inspectors will be taking legal action to complete those inspections. And those are by no means the majority. There's just a few outstanding septics that remain to be inspected. And there was quite a few that needed at least pump outs, and then some that needed received a failing grade and required complete replacement. The risk management offices are doing very well as well for negotiating their risk management plans. There are only a few outstanding plans that require to be negotiated remaining. So those are going very well as well. The provincial ministries, they also have to provide a summary of how they're doing on progress on their policies. So all of the ministries have either their policies are in progress or have been completely implemented. There's none outstanding to be begun. That's very good as well. So some of those policies are around prescribed instruments, road signage on provincial highways, things like that. And then the last category that receives a grade is source protection awareness and changes in behavior. So that's where we've kind of highlighted some of our education and outreach initiatives, being attendance at public events and festivals, targeted social media campaigns. Personally, I've given a couple different lectures at Fleming College to some of the programs there on what the source protection program is as a whole. So that's why overall the entire region received a grade of progressing well and on target, and also the Ganaraska plan did as well.
Thank you. Is there any questions for Jenna or any discussion on this report?
Awesome job.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jenna. Is there anyone opposed to receiving this report and approving it as required? Hearing none, the motion is carried. Last on the agenda mainly is the correspondence, and there are 6 items of correspondence, and the recommended resolution is that they be received. Could I have a motion for that then, please? Director Letham, and seconded by Director Windover. Is there any polls or discussion on the correspondence?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can just give a brief update on what all of them are. The first one, as I've mentioned previously, was the resolution we received from the City of Kawartha Lakes to support the amendment for the Canadian Ashores drinking water system. The second one was also from the City of Kawartha Lakes, and it was the support of the second municipal representative on our Source Protection Committee, being Mayor Brent Devlin from Minden Hills. There was some correspondence from our program coordinator at Lower Trent, notifying us that we can share with our municipalities the information that the Smart About Salt certification program is being offered for free online during the COVID-19 pandemic. So previously we've tried to generate some interest in potentially having municipal staff get trained in that. But now that it's being offered for free, we just wanted to provide that as a reminder that anybody can do the training if they're interested. There was some correspondence that's been circulated to the ministry, and this is pretty consistent across the province. Due to the pandemic and our restricted work abilities, most source protection regions are requesting extensions to the deadlines by which their risk management plans must be completed. So because we can't be out working with landowners, completing site visits, in other people's homes, inspecting their fuel tanks, that's kind of put a pause on the negotiating of our remaining risk management plans. So as we're not sure when we'll be back to working, in that capacity, we've applied for a 2-year extension, and there's correspondence to that effect. Then there was also some correspondence from Conservation Ontario, just as a reminder that it's been actually 20 years since the Walkerton tragedy. And, just to highlight some of the successes that we've had since then in the development of the Clean Water Act and the associated regulations, and then the local source protection plans as well. And as a kind of to go along with that, as a kind of unique thing, our region has partnered with Quinte, who's to the east of us, and it's called the Trust the Tap campaign. And it's actually just in the process of launching yesterday and today. We're sharing it with all the conservation authorities and municipalities across the province, just to really highlight how far the protections of municipal drinking water sources have come since the Walkerton tragedy, and that people should be completely trusting in their tap water. So, and also hopefully this will help to cut down on people's reliance on bottled water, which will ease stress on the environment too. So we will be contacting municipal staff, you know, and kind of sharing that word around. That's just started yesterday and today.
All right. Thanks, Jenna. If there's no further comments regarding the correspondence, is there anyone opposed to the receiving of the correspondence? Hearing none, I'll declare that motion carried. Is there any new business? Hearing none, then our next meeting is scheduled for March 25th, 2021, or at the call of the chair if earlier. So I hope by then we can meet face to face. Even if we have to wear masks, I would rather do that than this, but this has certainly allowed us to carry on our business. So if there's nothing else, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Director Wendover, all in favor? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Director Singh and Director McKenzie for joining us, and we'll see you at the next meeting. And for the rest of you on Kawartha Conservation, why don't we take a 5-minute break and reconvene and I don't know what time is it now. It's
20 after.
We'll reconvene at 2:25. Thank you.
Why are you clicking? There I am at the top. Mark.
Hey, Peter, we're just taking a 5-minute break or so until 2:25, and then we'll start our regularly scheduled board meeting at that time. So it'll be a few minutes yet.
Okay.
Peter on Zoom?
Yeah, Peter, he's on Zoom. Awesome.
In the border of Zoom meeting.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Wanda.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Is not everyone is back quite yet, so we'll just wait a minute.
I think they're fighting at the coffee pot.
Here we have 1, 2. Well, it's 2:25. I think we'll get our meeting started, and I'd like to welcome everyone here. The agenda is before you. Are there any additions to the agenda? For those of you who just joined us, the way we have been doing this is that if there are no one opposed to a motion, then we declare it passed rather than the other way around. And so anyway, if there are no changes to the agenda, can I ask for a motion to adopt? Director Moore, second by Director Ross. Anyone opposed to that? Hearing none, I will declare it passed. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Hearing none. The Board of Directors minutes for the meeting held in January. It does seem odd that it's a long time since we've had a meeting, but or a face-to-face meeting. I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll give you a motion.
By Director Hooper, seconded by Director Kieserbrink. Is there anyone opposed to that? Hearing none, I'll declare the motion carried. Any business arising from the minutes that won't be covered later on in the meeting? Hearing none, we have two presentations for us today. One is, where are we here? One is Director Warren, I believe. Am I correct on that? I don't remember.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Director Ron Warren, Director of Planning, Development, Engineering. He is available here with a presentation on the Mariposa Brook floodplain study.
Good, good. Thank you. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, thank you. Going to try and share my screen with everybody and pull up this presentation at the same time. All right. If everybody can see our general logo there.
Nope. So not yet, Ron.
No, not yet. Okay.
Green button at the bottom.
Yeah, I thought I hit the green button already.
Hit it harder.
Yeah.
There's a share screen button. Do we have to push that to see what you're showing us, Ron?
No, it's Ron's just got to select the screen to share, and then we'll be able to see his video. Sometimes it takes a few seconds for it to initialize, but what we can do, maybe John, is if you can help Ron out a little bit, that'd be great.
Oh,
there we go.
We're getting there.
Got it now.
We're there. Awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you for your patience. I'm just okay. I think that's gonna do the trick. For those of you who don't know, I'll be brief. This is the 8th of the 10 floodplain mapping studies we're we're doing in conjunction with the city of Kawartha Lakes. The Mariposa watershed is this large one labeled number 8 on this map. It's as I say, it's a large watershed, and it has at times, as you can see in these photos, it's a regular flooding brook, and at times it can be quite dramatic. As you can see, we've had notable floods in 2002, 2006, 2009, 18, and whatnot. And everybody knows in the area that it's bound to flood just about every spring. Just in terms of the actual proposed extent that we look at, it's identified here in the sort of the lime green color. And just for reference, this area right here is Little Britain. Just so everybody knows where we are. Lindsay is over here. Little Britain's right there, and that, I believe, is just the top end of Lake Scoopdog, right at the bottom center of the screen. The floodplain mapping details I really won't go into, because the data collection, the computer modeling, and the mapping are very similar to what we've followed in the previous. Sorry, yes, Councillor Kiesenbrink?
Sorry, on the last slide, when you say proposed extend, can you clarify what that means?
This little area here identified in the green is the area where all of the detailed work has been completed in terms of the flooding map. And you can see it in the maps that are to follow later in the presentation. It will give you a slightly better idea of it. And as I say, a lot of the details that went into how we collect the data is no different than it has been in other ones. And it led to us having these 6 maps, which really start to show just what you were asking, Director Kiesenbrink, the floodplain mappings. Map number 2 specifically is of interest to many people, because you're right in the village of Little Britain, and it shows the extent noted in red of the new floodplain area. And of course, one of the things that people always look for are specifically, how is it different than the previous study? The previous historic information we had in terms of a floodplain map was from 1991. So we're almost 30 years ago, although it doesn't seem like 1991 was 30 years ago to some of us. This study really shows the extents of that detail. See, the yellow line was the previous one we had from 1991, and as you can see, it's sort of cut off there in the west and cut off over here in the east. We've extended the extents of the study area, and the red line indicates the new floodplain mapping. It actually shows that it's not always more area than the previous studies. You can see that in some cases, such as right here, the yellow is actually a greater than the current or the new floodplain area. By my best count, I think there are about 7 dwellings that are in the floodplain now that hadn't been before. But overall, there's only probably slightly more area in the floodplain now than had been before. And really, I think I can just leave it at that. And if there are any questions, maybe I'll go back to that last map.
All right, thanks, Ron. Is there questions for Ron? Director Kiesenbrink?
I just want to commend all the work that was done. And as our CAO mentioned, hopefully the completion of this new study will help protect people and their properties from flooding and better assist KRCA with emergency management and planning information to guide land use decisions. We had funding, we had funding given over an 18-month period, which I think would have been August of 2019. Is that correct, when the federal funding would have expired?
The NDMP project through the federal government, through the chair, I can't recall exactly when it started, but I believe it finally wrapped up at the end of March 2020. And I know that we have been involved, our staff and many of the CAs have been involved in trying to get either an extension of this program or a new similar program that will provide some funding for this initiative, or these types of initiatives.
So further through you, Mr. Chair. So I think they gave us 46,000 and then we were supposed to contribute 46,000. Did we end up having to contribute more given how it was, the study was elongated?
Through the chair, I'm not 100% sure there was any more funding required than the matching of the federal dollars, but I could get back to you on that for sure.
And through you, Mr. Chair, the federal program, although it did end in March of 2020, the province recognizes that that the current situation has caused unusual circumstances. So they have been active in contacting staff that are performing floodplain studies with NDMP funding to look at an extension of that funding, so allow for the completion of studies. So it's kind of at the beginning stages of that. I believe the survey really only went out last week on that, but the federal government is aware that that there have been some complications.
And if I could, to your point, Mr. CAO, the latest, I think it's in our correspondence today in your agenda, but for that climate change information to come forward from the government, it's good timing for the study to be released and to show that we're right on target with their mandate for climate change initiatives.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Now, because of the mapping on the screen, which I appreciate, I can't see everyone's face. If there are those of you who have questions, please speak up.
Mr. Chair, I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Director Huber.
Mr. Warren talked about 7 developments that were in the floodplain that were being impacted. Is that residential, or would there be any sort of other than residential that are being impacted? And how severe an impact does the flooding have on these particular developments?
Through the chair, I believe there were 7 existing dwellings.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They're probably have been aware for a while that they're within the floodplain area. It just maybe identifies it specifically on a map, probably for the first time.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just building on that question, Mr. Warren, is that going to have a negative effect on those dwellings and their insurance issues and or like that? This makes it official that they're in a floodplain. Would that have any impact?
Through the chair, I've heard a variety of answers in regards to that. I'm not aware and really have no jurisdiction on that matter. I know that there are many places where you cannot get insurance, or insurance is more expensive when you're within a floodplain. But I think the crux of the matter is the insurance industry has their own mapping,
right? And
they follow that.
All right, thank you. Would have been nice if maybe we could have saved ourselves some money and just got their mapping. We won't go there. Okay, thank you. If no further questions for Mr. Warren, I'll then ask Mr. Chambers, our marketing communications specialist, to discuss our updated corporate website.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm not going to take up too much time and share screen. I'm sure everybody has likely seen the website at this point. So I just wanted to just give you a quick overview of some of the things we have experienced and seen and benefited from, certainly during this COVID pandemic. We launched the website on April 8th, and one of the main functions in this entire project was to be able to be much more customer focused in terms of allowing people to get the information they wanted, the information they needed from us in a timely fashion, almost in a self-directed sense, as well as creating an opportunity for online forms so people could apply for permits or planning or make inquiries without physically actually having to come in from into the office. For some people coming from Scugog, perhaps it's a bit of a haul to come up here. So as I say, we launched on April 8th, and what I can share with you already is that since that time, processed through our website, we have had 12 standard permit applications, 11 streamlined permit applications, 2 property information requests, and more than 19 inquiries regarding permit and planning. The website, other than being completely accessible to meet Ontario standards right through until 2025, when the latest standards go to, multilingual, really, from my perspective, a lot of the magic of this website actually happens behind the scenes, things that the average person wouldn't see. When you go to the website, it's very intuitive, it's easy to read, it's easy to see and navigate. But through the administrative side of the website, what we're able to do is completely drill down to where people are going, what they're looking for, how long it's taking them to find it. And even more so than that, for example, just looking at some of the analytics, one of the top searches we have on the website in the search function is leaf blowing into water, and docks is number 2. We can see through that people are searching for those 2 items on our website, but they are in fact ineffective searches. So we can go in and say, what information are we missing? Can we add additional information? People are looking for, do I need a permit for a dock, for example? So now we're able to actually determine what people want. We can enhance the content on our website, which we have been doing. We've been building on the information we've already had. It's important to note, when we started this project, every single piece of content on this website has been rewritten. It's been made much simpler, much more comprehensive for people to find what they're looking for. So one of the processes we go through now on an almost daily basis is looking at those search terms. What are people looking for? Are they finding what they're looking for? And if not, how can we make that information more readily available to them? So what we found is conservation areas, certainly a big search term throughout COVID, especially. People wanted to know if it's been open. We've been able to reach out to people and let them know that updated information. Permits and planning have been the second most visited and searched items. People are spending just under 2 minutes on the site, which is actually a dramatic improvement from the old site. But what it also shows us is people aren't spending their time searching for information. They're finding the information they want, then they're being able to read it, get that information, and move on. We're really pleased with how the launch has gone. Obviously, COVID has been a difficult time for everyone. We found it's been a positive time to launch this website. So if we have to find a positive, that's certainly one we can take away. So moving forward, I mean, we certainly appreciate all of your support in helping push this project along and seeing the value and benefit in it. We've had over 400 pieces of feedback. We have feedback forms on each of our website pages. And as I say, more than 400 pieces of feedback, people asking for additional information, finding holes and gaps that we've now been able to address. Moving forward, obviously, this is a long-term investment for Kawartha Conservation. It was a big investment by the board and staff time. So where we would like to see this go now is we want to give even more control to the community, and certainly in a perspective of permits and planning. So people have now been able to do their permits and planning applications online, get that information. What we really want them to be able to do now is see where they are in that process. So I have submitted an application. Has it been reviewed? What stage is it at? And that's sort of where we want to go next with this. Just as I say, to provide that bit of extra control in the hands of the customers and the clients. And the other thing that's going to do is create additional capacity within the organization. If we're not having to answer the phone and answer those inquiries directly, we're spending more time actually getting those tasks done by providing that information right in the hands of the customer. So that's where we hope to take this. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, once again, thank you very much for all of your support on this.
Thank you, and a job well done. Is there any questions for Mr. Chambers? Hearing none. I don't think I asked for a motion to receive these reports. Could I have one now, please? Director Kieserbrink. I have a seconder by Director Wendover. Is there anyone opposed?
Sorry, just a quick,
sorry.
2 quick questions. I apologize. Under the delegation request is only found under About Us and then the Board of Directors. Was it intentional to make the delegation request something that you have to search a little bit harder to find?
It was through you, Mr. Chair. It was certainly not something that was intentional that way. It was quite an interesting process. When we were determining where things would go, we spent an entire day looking at the sitemap process of what belongs sort of in certain areas. So you'll notice when you go through the site, things like lake management planning documents, those actually appear in multiple locations because they belong in multiple locations. If there is an opportunity or if there is a logical place where that delegation request form makes sense, and certainly based on feedback or comments and things we receive, it may make more sense to right under that About Us section, have its own link to say delegation request form. But it was, nothing was hidden or sort of buried within this site. It was looking at the old site, and I mean, the starting point was where were people going previously? And then we ranked all of those pages, all of those sites, and then we had a starting point in terms of what people were looking for, what we assumed they would be looking forward moving forward.
So your news posts on the new website, which are so critical now with COVID and all the information that the public want to know, are those news posts also sent out as press releases?
Yes, they are. Again, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Each time, so the subscription system, the way this works is you can subscribe to an individual page. You can subscribe to news or anything else. So for example, if I subscribe to conservation areas or can read conservation area, if there is a change made to that page, I get a notification. Could be the dog park is open or it's not open or we're closed, whatever the case is. With the news releases, when a news release is done, that is also published and then immediately sent out to all of the subscribers of that as well.
It's very visual, detailed, and user-friendly. It's an amazing job.
Thank you. Is there any further questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So sort of goes along with Ms. Kieserbrink's comments too. If for example, someone doesn't make it to a particular seminar or whatever that Kawartha hosts, will there be a sort of a separate place where you can go and sort of recall some of the presentations that have been made, like in the past?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, for example, I think there was one on flooding. So if somebody didn't make it to that particular, could they go through that and go back to some of the previous things that the KRC has hosted?
So in terms of items that have been included within board agendas and those sorts of presentations, they can go into the board calendar. And for example, the presentation Ron had just done a few moments ago, they could go back through and look at that particular presentation. If it is like a webinar type presentation, we will be looking at moving forward, creating those opportunities in light of COVID and things like that, doing more of those things where we create content or a webinar structure that people can go back and revisit after the fact.
Well, that's good. Thank you. And I will say great kudos to staff for the amount of work they put into doing this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have a motion to receive these presentations. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, motion is carried. Next on the agenda is the consent items. Could I have a motion then to receive, where are we here? Yes, to, just a second here, make sure I get everything done right. Yes, to approve the consent items. Could I have a motion on that, please? Or by Director Dunn, moved by Director Dunn, seconded by Director Latham. Is there any polls?
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, on 7.6 and 7.7. I mean, we don't need to extract them. I just, if you want me to ask the questions first, but if you'd rather extract them and deal with them separately, but just a couple of questions. How would you like to proceed?
Are there any other questions on any of those reports?
Just the CAO report.
No, and that's what Director Latham just mentioned. So we'll deal with them. Go ahead, Director Latham, with your questions.
Thank you. Just on 7.6, the CAO report, Mark. Great update. Good report. I just had a question now. Sorry, let me just find it here. You talk about, there's a lot of changes with the COVID and everything that the pandemic and the way some of the changes in your staffing and you've had to adopt and put new technology and change the way you're doing some of the business. And I think my biggest question is are you looking at making any of these changes, or will you look at making any of these changes permanent? Sometimes out of a situation like this, I don't mean layoffs and such like that, but out of a situation like this, sometimes we're forced to find other ways to do business. And sometimes those other ways we find are more efficient than some of the ways we have been doing business, whether that's, online or technology wise. And I know, not having the thing open or not being able to get with people has sort of forced you to look at things a little bit different, and your staff to, issue permits a little differently. And I just wondered if, moving forward when we're through a lot of this, if it's something that you might have a look back and say, is this, are there some protocols we've put in place here that might be worthwhile continuing on in the long run?
Yep. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That short answer is absolutely yes. I think that's certainly the case. There's a number of improvements that we've been making in order to reduce paper, for instance. And certainly with COVID, there is a concern that as you physically handle more objects in a general sense, there is a greater risk or potential for transmission. So certainly looking at how we handle our planning, permitting, how we receive our revenues, for instance, on the planning permitting side. A lot of times that's through checks right now. So with the advancement of our website, for instance, it certainly enables a lot more payment options that weren't previously available, and that's a benefit. And then in terms of the physical check itself, we've actually implemented some technology that improves that process as well, and actually reduces our cost for actually handling a specific item like a check. So those are service improvements that are internal, that maybe, especially the second one, people wouldn't notice as much, but certainly internally we do, and has a greater benefit for us. So certainly adoption of technology, looking at digital records more and more, which is critical for a remote workforce, which I also see continuing in some capacity. Those are certainly in the pandemic a reality right now, but I do see that they would continue as well.
It's great. If I might, I think I would love to see, some kind of report back later post-pandemic when we're past all this, just at, some of the different things that you did and what you opted for various reasons to continue with, and, just where those efficiencies were found and how they sort of work. So thanks for that. That's all. That was my only question on 7.6.
Yeah, and yeah, certainly. Sorry, Mr. Chair, but certainly would be willing to come back to the board with some of the improvements that we made. I'm pretty proud of our staff and some of the things that we're doing in order to adapt to the situation that we currently have. So, so I do believe that's a great improvement that we're making on a number of fronts.
Good, thank you, Director Keysbrink. And was yours on 7.6 as well?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And you'll have to guide me. I'm not sure if this question is appropriate now or if it's a matter regarding staff. Should it be in the closed session? I don't know how this works, so I would ask that question first.
My preference would be to err on the side of caution.
Okay.
If
we do have a closed session coming up at the end, is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I'll ask my questions then.
All right, thank you. Director Dunn, did you have a question on this?
Not so much a question as a comment, because I think the opportunities for me are very exciting, and especially in the planning process, where a planner from Peterborough, an applicant, and the planner from KRCA could all meet at the same time without anybody having to drive. It saves everybody money, and quite frankly, it saves everybody time. So I think the opportunities here are just staggering, and for me, it's one of those benefits that's coming out, because I can just see when you got a planner in Peterborough and an applicant from Manila and a planner all trying to find time that works, they could do it at 8 o'clock in the morning and get it over and done with. So I think the opportunities are just overwhelming. So it's just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, and I agree. There are some opportunities here, no question. Director Moore, did you have a question? You are muted, Director.
Sorry, it's not really a question. It's more a comment. When you're talking about how it's much better to be able to do this all online. Being counselor, I have had numerous calls from people who are complaining they do not use the computer, so they cannot get permits that they want without phoning and figuring out a way of getting them by mail. They only pay by check, and they feel that some of the residents are being discriminated against because they are not savvy with the computer. Just something to point out, not a complaint, not anything, just a comment from our own residents.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if somebody else was before me, but my picture's not on there anymore, so I can't see.
We miss you.
Yeah, right. It's just that my question is in regards to 7.7, is that I see there's a lot of hardware, software procurement it's been purchased. Will that put us offside in regards to our budget for this year and moving into 2021 with Mr. Chanette on the line? So, I mean, I don't know whether that's a fair question to ask, or.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair, I can answer that. And you're right. In 7.7, that is something that we've identified is some more procurement. Working remotely, that is something that we had to do in order to get some laptops going. But I think if this goes on long term, I think there's going to be a cost for municipalities, for conservation authorities alike. We are not currently really set up for remote workforce. But what we are doing is we're trying to make all the moves in order to make sure that we're able to be as effective and as efficient as we can. So right now, you have noted there are a number of layoffs that we've had to make, and everyone that is working on all the essential work that we're doing, they are outfitted with computers that enable them to do what they need to do in order to work and be efficient. If we were moving to an entirely full-on remote workforce, we'd have to make some additional adjustments to that. But hopefully when we bring people back, the pandemic will have subsided a bit. If not, there will be, but we'll manage to it, is really where I'm looking at. And I think that's the key thing that we're looking at right now is our initial projections were pretty scary in terms of where we were and where we need to be. So we are managing to that.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, you're right. Correct. You want to be in retail. You want to see scary times.
All right. Thank you. Director Letham, did you have a question on 7.7?
I did, thank you. I guess it's similar in line, just regarding, some of the challenges, Mark, you've been going through with the budget and staffing and, not being able to operate at full capacity. Are you looking at pushing any programs to next year to try and save some money? I mean, you've not only from a people perspective have you lost, but you've also lost a good 2.5, 3 months out of your work schedule. So rather than trying to, and recognizing that revenues are down, rather than trying to cram everything in for the rest of the year. And I mean, that I might be talking more about special projects. Are you looking at any kind, and I don't need an answer today or whatever, but are you looking in the long run at some of these projects if we can't, scheduled for this year with a budget, that maybe we push the program to next year, push the budget to next year with it, obviously, and then take that pressure off, yourself from a workload perspective, and maybe off some of the municipalities moving forward from a budget perspective, and that 4-year or 3-year program becomes a 4 or 5-year program instead. I mean, are you sort of looking at that big picture from a work plan moving forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is absolutely what we're doing, recognizing that the operating levy and the special projects are tied together. That does have an impact on the workforce itself. So I am cognizant of those, and also aware that special projects have a specific deliverable at the same time. So it's important to get those deliverables done, and certainly with the field season, that does make it difficult if you lose an entire field season to be able to create the reports and do what you need to do. So we are taking a look at that very closely, and be looking at what we can do to mitigate offset. And we have already done that with some of our funders as well. For instance, on the implementation stand front from a lake management planning perspective, we did receive a substantial MAFRA grant, and we are working with that funder in order to move those deliverables to next year, for an example.
Okay, glad to hear that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any other Director Kiesebrink on 7.7?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 62, where you outline the net deficit to operations, you've shown that the different efforts that have been made to minimize the impact, including utilizing the Canada Temporary Wage Subsidy. Are there any other, I mean, perhaps Mr. Shennett, who's here, or our CAO could comment, but are there any other government programs that we could qualify for to help offset some of our deficit to date?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can answer that question. There are a couple of different government subsidies that are certainly available for a number of businesses. This is the only granting program that actually suits our business. There is another one that the federal government came out with that was supporting businesses up to 30%, and I know nonprofits were identified within that. But conservation authorities don't necessarily fit in that same category. We're actually seeking some clarification from the Canada Revenue Agency at this point in time, as well as a couple of other conservation authorities. So while we're keeping our fingers crossed, all the guidance that we've received to date suggests that we won't be eligible for that.
All right, thank you. Is there any, Director Dunn, you had a question?
Well, once again, not a question, but political parties seem to be eligible for this. I can't imagine it's something that actually provides a worthwhile service, wouldn't it?
Okay, thank you. Well put. Hearing no further questions or comments, is there any opposed to the approval of the consent items? Hearing none, the motion is carried. Next on the agenda is the 2019 audited financial statements. And I just have to find them here in my agenda. Mr. Chenette is here with us, and also Ms. Stephen, our Director of Finance. And so I'll turn it over to whoever wants to take it, Mr. Mahowski or Ms. Stephen or Mr. Chenette. And welcome, Mr. Chenette.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'll do is I will turn it over to Mr. Chenette in order to give an overview of the auditor's report. It is his report, and it summarizes our financial kind of activities over the last year, and kind of summarizes the information. We did have a surplus last year, and there are some recommendations in the report in terms of how to allocate those to different areas.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chenette. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. There's a couple of issues. Your agenda sets out various motions that we'll be seeking from the board to finalize the statement. I just want to share that before you get to that voting stage, we would like to add a note to the statements in regard to COVID. When we first finalized these draft statements with the management, it was not such an issue, but it seems to have become, within my profession, a scenario where it is far more important to just mention it, the uncertainties of it all, even though it's subsequent to your year end. So it doesn't affect your year numbers, but there is a definite trend to having disclosure that it exists as an uncertainty. And so I have prepared a note that I'm hoping that you would accept as being added to the final statements as well as part of your approval process. The audit is more or less done. When I say that, the dilemma for auditing is always that per our rules, we require the lawyers to sign off on any issues as of the date the board approves the statement. So it always creates this funny scenario where we're technically waiting for them to approve. However, there are no outstanding legal issues that we are aware of. So, and that's what we're expecting the lawyers to confirm. Obviously, if they suggest there's an issue outstanding that wasn't known, it will be a far bigger issue than whether the statements have to be rediscussed. So we don't expect any issue there. The statements, I believe, are pre-circulated. I won't address every page, but I would suggest that page 160 of your package is the statement of operations, which indicates the surplus referred to by Mark. You have a surplus in the year of $179,000 compared to budget of a budgeted deficit of $35,000 loss. The primary differences is the revenue is down $287,000 while expenditures are down $501,000. Because of your accounting policies, though, revenue, the revenue issue is not really an issue at all, because expenditures on grants and on the special operating and benefiting projects only get recognized when the work is done. So because we spent less money, like 200,000 less on those projects, by default, it automatically created a $200,000 less revenue, because it only becomes revenue when you actually spend it. So the reason your surplus is primarily an impact of expenditures being down below budget. the most notable area is planning and regulation. And it's, as in many situations, primarily a wage factor. There were some gaps between hiring people, plus in the budget was the plan to hire an engineer during the year that did not happen. So that created like a savings of 190,000. That is primarily the reason why you have a surplus this year, though, in that area. This page also has been the groupings have been altered from prior years. This is more to agree with your internal statements and your budget to make it a little bit more identical. Some are exactly the same as they were, but there are, if you compared this to your budget and such, it's a much closer match than it used to be. And that was suggested and seemed like a good idea. And most of the work done on that was done by Jonathan Lucas, your general accountant, who did the regroupings, and we verified that they are correctly regrouped. But this should look more like you're seeing at your regular meetings type of thing. I'm jumping backwards to the page 158, the statement of financial position. And the statement of financial position is where you end up the year. You have in the bank 250,000 more. That's directly linked to, if you think about that, if you made 179,000 more, you would expect to have 179,000 more in the bank, and you do. The rest of that is just a factor of ups and downs between payables and receivables, and the fact that your expenditures on capital assets were not that significant in the year. They approximately balance to amortization. So, I mean, you had three major expenditures that we capitalized in the year. One was a new vehicle that that was 36,000, and the board authorized up to 42. The new website, which was not completed at December, but had incurred expenses of 32,000, was capitalized, and the Point Loop Trail was finished for the year. That was in the tune of 14,000. So your total capital expenditures were 83,000. But, and so because of that, because it wasn't like in excess of amortization, it did not really impact your cash per se. Going down, it is a very comparable year to prior years in general, in most categories, if you look at it. And so I'm not going to address each one. To not wanting. I'm only saying I'm not. I believe you've all seen these and seen them internally, so I don't want to belabor sort of obvious things. When you get down to net assets, 3.9, the bottom number on that page compared to 3.7, that effectively is your equity, your book equity, the conservation's book equity. The dilemma with it, or maybe not the dilemma is a poor choice of words, is the vast majority of that 3 million is tied up in capital assets. So it's not like you have that much money sitting available to you. The capital assets are over 3 million. So your liquid assets, or like your liquid equity is about 800,000 at the end of the year, 809. So this comes back to page 159 in your package, which is the statement of changes in net assets. There's no doubt that the bottom numbers are correct, but what the allocation of the surplus to various reserves is actually requires a board motion, and that's part of the scripted motions that exist. and that's on this page. You can see that where it's been spent. Some are very standard. Primarily the top one, unrestricted, is sort of when you don't allocate it to a reserve, it goes there. That's by default. And some of the others are very defined. The bottom three specifically are all related to fairly Durham East Cross Forest is basically a Durham only item. Windy Ridge is more or less a fund that was created from monies from a particular donor, as is Ken Reed Conservation. So those three are sort of different, leaves you the other three. Conservation Initiatives has primarily always been funded by just unrestricted donations, and then capital assets. And so the top two, the capital assets is the one that we're suggesting merged with, I'm sorry, drawing a blank, flood and water level monitoring. It used to be a $5,000 reserve, and we're just saying it had sat at 5,000 for many years. We're putting it together with capital assets because it's sort of the same thing, an equipment purchase reserve. So the top two reserves, or by historical precedent, the profit, so to speak, from the vehicle and equipment pool goes to the capital assets. And this year there's a bit more being put there. This would be possibly the fund that was talked about when there was, in the previous question, you talked about expenditures to make, perhaps make working at home more of a practicality for this, will require some outlays. That would be the fund that might fund that perhaps in the future. Before that, before questions, the note that I'm suggesting, and I'm not sure, I believe Jonathan was going to help me put this on screen, but I'll read it to you, because if I put it on screen, you would be still here at 7 o'clock trying to say, can we finish this meeting soon?
Peter, I'll share the note as you speak.
So
I think Mr. Lucas is going to bring it up for us.
Okay. Okay.
Please let me know if you can see a subsequent event note.
Would you, Mr. Chair, would you prefer I read it as well, or just stay quiet?
It's a dangerous question to ask. Yeah, if you wish to read it, please do so.
It is technically a subsequent event because your year end is December 31st. At that point, there was no pandemic. So the first part is basically describing it. In March 2020, the World Health Organization classified the COVID-19 outbreak as a pandemic. The full impact of the COVID-19 outbreak continues to evolve. As such, it is uncertain as to the full magnitude that it will have on the authority. Management is actively monitoring the impact on financial condition, liquidity, operations, suppliers, industry, and workforce. To date, Kawartha Region Conservation Authority has made emergency temporary leaves of employees and restricted access to the public to help curtail the spread of the COVID-19 virus. It is expected that a significant reduction in planning and regulation revenue will occur due to the general slowdown of the construction industry. On your report, previous COVID report, where there were questions about the impact on the deficit, I would say that in my experience to date, conservation is the most active one in making changes on the in giving temporary leaves of staff when they can see falling income, even if it's still just a projection. And I would say that has put you a bit ahead of the game in being able to deal with any financial impact, because many are still sort of, because the primary scenario right now with COVID is how long and how much impact. And so it's really an uncertainty issue almost from an accounting standpoint. And so many people are just sort of stalled in limbo of not doing anything, which may be not the best approach. I would compliment your management on being proactive on saying, we're going to deal with this. And if it turns out better than we expected, then we'll go forward from there. I think that's the primary issues. Within our discussion with management, there was no disagreements on any significant presentations in the statements, and so attached is in jargon sense, a clean audit report that says that your statements conform to accounting policies. I'm open to any questions that you may have, or comments, or even wording changes to the note that anyone may wish.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chenette. Before we go to questions, there is a recommended resolution resolved of the 2019 draft financial statements as audited by the firm Peter Chenette Professional Corporation be approved and the reserves be allocated as presented in the financial statement. Could I have a motion regarding that, please? Director Wendover moves it, seconded by, I have a seconder, please. Director Kiesebrink. All right, thank you. And now as for questions, I think Director Letham, you had questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just, I don't know if it's a question for Mr. Chenette. Why would we allocate, if we're fortunate enough to have a surplus at the end of last year, why would we allocate those funds to specific reserves until we know what the fallout's going to be regarding a deficit from this year? I mean, we don't know by the end of this year with, with all the moves the CAO is making with staff and everything, we're obviously, through nobody's fault, we're going to probably end up with a deficit. Would it not be more prudent to take that surplus, put it into a contingency reserve until we know where we stand financially at the end of this year? And then when we have a better idea of our long-term financial situation, we can then take some of that funds if necessary and allocate them to specific reserves. And in the meantime, have something there so that if we end up, 100 or 150,000 in the hole, we've actually got some money sitting there that if the board chooses, they could apply to that operating deficit at the end of the year. Why would we not do that? Why would we immediately allocate them to reserves at this point?
The allocation, even if you if you allocate it all to unrestricted net assets, for example, that is effectively your reserve as a contingency. So it becomes more like the retained earnings of an entity. So the 87,000 allocated to it is almost serves exactly the same purpose without limiting it to a specific contingency related just to COVID or just to such. That 297 total in there is effectively in a reserve that would be where any loss would go. The other one, the additional monies allocated to the capital assets acquisition, I think reflects part of that is just that within the previous discussion about COVID, the thought is there will be expenditures to operate if it continues to be too bad, together with a concern that there has been a lack of funds for capital assets that has been raised several times over the past few years that I've heard. And your motor fleet is definitely of an age that you're going to be facing significant expenditures in there. So I think there was some thought of those are the two main areas, and like the main area of need is the capital access and sort of a contingency fund. In your world, in the world of the conservation, unrestricted net assets serves as your contingency fund. When you're putting money there, that's what it is.
Okay, so if I can, just as a quick follow-up, so that 297.8, that'll be the total amount in there. That is basically a contingency reserve that could be available to the board at the end of this year if the board saw fit to make up some of the operating surplus as a result of this pandemic. Is that correct?
But if for example, you lost 100,000 in 2020, 20, it would come off that 297.
So it would come off the 297 without affecting the levies or anything to the different municipalities. It's sort of a fund that's there that would just, it would draw down that fund and keep the
Yes.
budget balance that way,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, that's what it would do.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, just as a slight follow-up, you are an operation that spends over $3 million a year. That is your primary cushion, that 297. So if it shrinks too much, there would be pressure to try and increase it somewhat too, though.
Yes, thank you. And certainly, as you noted, we do have pressures in our fleet that are a vehicle fleet that will certainly eat into that. So thank you, Mr. Chanette. Is there any further questions? Director Kiesebrink?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the revenue section, where it looks like under special projects management, we're around 83,000 less than the budget. And then under grants and special operating and benefiting projects, we're about 165,000 less than what we budgeted. I was wondering if someone could speak to those dramatic differences in the actual versus the budget for these revenue projects.
Perhaps I can clarify. If you look on the bottom expenditure, those funds were actually raised. But if you look on the bottom expenditure, special and general benefiting projects, you can see that you spent 226,000 less than what you budgeted for. And that's what I went when I said that I did not explain very clearly, and I apologize, but the monies were raised, but because they weren't spent, they don't get to be recorded in revenue through your accounting policies. They become a deferred revenue, and then they're subsequently reflected when you spend them. Does that help clarify?
You're muted, Director Kiesebrink, but that's satisfying.
Sorry. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chanette. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Right, if there are no further questions.
Can I just clarify, in your resolution, if you're about to call it, I am understanding that if there's no comment, that when you accept the statement, you're including the note that was just prepared today will be included with them.
Yes, it will be. We just get confirmation from the mover of the motion, and I forget who that was. Who moved that motion? Was it Director Windover?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Are you comfortable with that addition, Director Windover? We can't hear you. There you are.
I am, sir. Yeah.
All right.
Hear
Thank
me?
you. Thank you. And Director Kiesebrink, I believe you seconded. You're okay with that? Okay, good. Hearing no further discussion. Is there anyone opposed to the resolution? Hearing none, I'll declare it carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chanette.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the municipal levy weighted vote. And the recommended resolution, you have it in front of you. I don't think I'm going to read it all out. The resolved that the 2020 operating budget be set at $3,774,250. And maybe I should read it all out. That the general operating municipal levy in support of the operating budget be set at $1,573,700, with the operating levy being apportioned between watershed municipalities as follows: City of Kawartha Lakes at 59.9204%, or $942,966. Region of Durham at 35.3997%, or $557,085. The municipality of Trent Lakes at 4.3251%, or $68,064. And the township of Cabot-Monaghan at 0.3549%, or $5,585. And that the 2020 general benefiting projects budget be set at $60,000 and the levy be approved at $35,000 on a portion between watershed municipalities as follows: City of Kawartha Lakes at $20,972, the region of Durham at $12,390, the municipality of Trent Lakes at $1,514, and the township of Cabot-Monaghan at $124. And that the special benefiting projects proceed as the required funding is approved by the benefiting municipalities. Don't ask me to read that again. Could I have a mover regarding the budget? Moved by, sorry, who was that? Director Hooper?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Director Letham. And now I'll ask Mr. Mahowski, or if he has any comments, and Ms. Stephen, and then Ms. Dalmore will conduct the vote, weighted vote.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just recap very briefly on the budget process. The budget we brought forward to the board several times last year. The last time that we brought this forward was in November. We circulated the budget shortly afterwards to our member municipalities. If everyone remembers, there were two options that were proposed. We had a situation with the provincial government that came into play, and they were looking at reshaping conservation authorities. So that was certainly something that we were aware of coming into the budget year, and we were also aware that that there were pressures on the provincial government in terms of being fiscally responsible themselves. So what we did was, as a board, we took a conservative approach to our budget. So two budget versions were presented. We took the more conservative of the two, so the lesser of the two, and that was the budget that went forward to our municipalities. Key highlights were the municipality levy remains the same as a previous year, as 2018. There was the reshaping included mandatory programs and other programs as defined by the province. So those continue forward. The general special projects would proceed as scheduled. That was another assumption that was in there. One assumption that we did have in there, which was key, was that the province keeps the $25,000. So that was something that was confirmed by the province. They will be keeping the $25,000 going to this authority, and they'll keep the same numbers that are going out to the other authorities. So this is the 50% of what we used to get, but that was an externality that we weren't sure of at the time. There is a reduction, an essential reduction of FTEs from 21 to 20, or equivalent amount in revenues or expenditures. So that is something that will have to be taken into account upon the passing of the budget. And then this is further to something that was mentioned before, but all the more important with COVID, is an assessment of our business and organizational practices. So maybe we're a bit ahead of the curve on that, and being able to prepare for the pandemic maybe a little bit better. But that is certainly something that that we note as well as key in this budget process, making sure that we meet provincial direction, municipal direction, and our needs around customer service. So those are the highlights. The big one, of course, being that the municipal levy is the same as in 2018. with some, of course, variations due to apportionment percentages.
All right, thank you. Is there any discussion on this? I think it's been out there for a while. Is there any discussion? Hearing none.
No discussion. I just have a comment.
Go ahead.
I just like to say thank you to staff and everyone for where we are and where we're going with this particular budget. And I think Mr. Bukowski said it very aptly, so that we're kind of ahead of the curve a little bit in regards to the COVID thing. We didn't know this at the time that was when we were in budget discussions, but I'd just like to say thank you.
All right, thanks, Director Hooper. You've put it very well. At this point in time, then I'll turn it over to Ms. Dollamore then to conduct the vote individually.
We're just bringing Melanie online here. She's just, we're bringing up her screen, and she's just going to unmute herself here.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will start by running through everyone individually, and if you could please provide a clear audible response, either yes or no. To begin, I'll start with Director Dunn. Can we have your response?
Yes.
Thank you. Next, I call upon Director Hooper.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Hooper. Next, Director Kiesebrink.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Kiesebrink. Okay, next I call upon Vice Chair Letham.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Moore.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Moore. Next, Director Ross.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, Director Seymour Fagan.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Windover. We can't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Windover. And finally, Chair Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. That's everyone.
And that's great. It was unanimous. Thank you, Ms. Dollamore. That's it for action items. Is there any new business? Mr. Mahowski, I think you had something on your list.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple of items that that I have. One is I circulated this to all of you. It's the annual report. So we're very happy to kind of present the accumulation of all of staff's efforts over last year, including all of your support on the different actions that we've taken throughout the year that support our strategic plan. So we're very happy to have that. We did change one page on the annual report from the one that was circulated to you as well. Since the financial statements were being forwarded to you, we put the actual numbers in. So usually our annual report precedes the actual audited statement. So we did make that one change, and we'll be circulating that to all of our watershed municipalities, and also to further to a resolution in January, forwarding that to our provincial friends as well at the various ministries. The other item that you would have seen from Melanie this morning was just highlighting the resolution that the Township of Scugog graciously passed in front of their council supporting conservation authorities. The County of Frontenac supported Scugog's resolution as well. So just wanted to bring those to your attention.
All right, thank you. Is there any other new business? All right. Hearing none, is there any reports and updates from board members? It's pretty quiet out there, I know, and there's not too many community events to promote, or I wish there was. Next item then is a closed session, And I would like a motion then for us to go into a closed session. And once we do that, then we'll have to make sure everyone is using the proper etiquette in over this type of a meeting in a closed session. So once we go into closed, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mahowski to walk us through that. So could I have a motion then to go into closed? Director Dunn, seconded by Director Ross. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, we are now in closed, and Mr. Mahowski, I'm going to let you walk us through the etiquette here.
Yep.
Should we turn off the YouTube recording?
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll get a couple things underway, and we won't